She made a $448,000 mistake in under 7 seconds. That's how long it took Karen to drag the last black trash bag across my wooden bridge.
This is illegal and I'm
my
taking
family's
it down.
bridge, and hurl it into the river below like she was feeding a
You
monster.
are
I watched from
trespassing
20
on my
feet away
property.
as she kicked the railing
This
hard enough
footage,
to crack it,
corroborated
muttering,
by the
"Let him
forensic
pay for
evidence
it."
in this
What she
file
didn't know
clearly
was that this
shows Ms.
time she
Davis
wasn't
intentionally
alone. A
destroying
flashing red
HOA
light
property.
blinked from the post she had never noticed. My newest camera, motion triggered, night clarified, and recording everything she had done for weeks. She froze when she finally saw me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move toward her. I just said, "That bag you threw, it's evidence, and the judge already has your name." Her face drained like someone pulled the plug. Before we continue, hit like and subscribe, because what happened next is the reason Karen's trash cost her more than her car. And trust me, this story doesn't smell any better than that river did. I'm a former Army engineer, the kind who spent years building structures meant to outlast storms and people alike. These days I take care of the 40 acres my grandfather left me, quiet land, tall pine, and one wooden bridge that feels more like a spine than a crossing. He built it after returning from WWA, hands still shaking but stubborn enough to carve strength into every beam. I reinforced the foundation myself years later, sliding steel trusses beneath the planks while my father steadied the lantern and joked that I was overbuilding everything I touched. That bridge isn't just private by law, it's private by blood. I grew up sitting under it during summer storms, counting thunder while my father told me stories about the men who built the world before we were born. I never imagined I'd spend adulthood defending that same place from someone who treated it like a public landfill. When the town rerouted construction traffic, everything shifted. Dump trucks rumbled through side streets, and that's when Karen decided my bridge was her personal dumping zone. First it was a single black bag, then a stack of broken chairs. Soon it became contractor debris, tossed with the confidence of someone who believed consequences were optional. I stayed calm at first. Years in uniform teach you that patience can break opponents faster than anger ever will. But even patience has an edge, and every new pile on that bridge sharpened mine. Some fights start loud. Mine started with silence, a bridge, and a woman who believed no rule applied to her. My grandfather bought this land in 1956, long before the county paved half the roads that run through it now. Back then it was nothing more than a stretch of tangled brush, a narrow river cutting through the middle, and a rise of oak trees that caught the sunset like stained glass. People told him it was unusable, too wild, too remote, too expensive to maintain. He bought it anyway, paid in full, and spent the next decade shaping it into the place that would become the quiet backbone of our family. The bridge came first, his pride, his therapy, his rebellion against a world that had chewed him up in war. He built it with reclaimed timber, iron nails, and a stubborn sense of purpose. When he registered it with the county as a private access structure, the clerk joked that no one else would ever need to cross it. Grandfather just smiled and said, "Someday my family will." He wasn't wrong. When I was a kid, that bridge was my training ground. My father used to take me out on weekends with a dented toolbox and a thermos of coffee he shouldn't have let me sip from. We'd replace loose planks, sand splinters, check bolts after storms. I can still feel the texture of the wood beneath my palms, grain raised from humidity, warm from sunlight, sturdy in a way only things built with intention can be. My father always said, if you want to understand a man, look at what he builds when no one's watching. I didn't understand it then. I do now, after I came back from the army. Years older in ways that don't show on the face, the land felt like the only place where my thoughts settled. I reinforced the bridge with steel trusses, slid beneath the wooden belly with a welding mask and steady hands. When sparks fell into the river and fizzled out, it felt like a conversation between generations. My grandfather built its bones. I secured its future. And then my father died, and the land became the last tie I had left to either of them. Selling it wasn't an option. Letting it fall apart wasn't an option. Protecting it became less of a responsibility and more of a promise. One I wasn't willing to break for anyone, especially not someone like Karen. People don't realize how fragile a watershed is. One wrong chemical, one bag of old paint, one pile of pressure-treated wood tossed into the wrong place can poison a riverbed for years. The bridge doesn't just hold memories, it shields the water flowing beneath it. The county map even labels the area as a protected runoff zone, meaning any environmental violation leads directly back to the landowner. So when the first black trash bag appeared on that bridge, my pulse tightened. Not because of the mess, but because of the risk. Every bag she tossed wasn't just disrespect, it was a financial threat, an environmental hazard, and an emotional trespass rolled into one. People think property fights are about land. They rarely are. Mine was about legacy, memory, and the weight of everything my family built with their hands. Violating the bridge wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an attack on the very last piece of them I still had. And Karen, she was just getting started. Karen entered my life the way most problems do, slowly, repeatedly, and with a confidence she never earned. She wasn't elected to anything, but she acted like the county hired her personally to monitor every tree, driveway, and mailbox within a 5-mile radius. People called her the environmental enforcer, mostly as a joke, but Karen didn't take it that way. She wore the title like a badge, walking around with a clipboard she bought herself and a whistle no one asked her to use. The first time she approached me, I had just finished tightening bolts underneath the bridge. She stood on the bank with her arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Those trees along your property line look unsightly," she announced, as if giving an official citation. "You should trim them, they obstruct the neighborhood's visual harmony." I remember blinking at her confused because my land doesn't border a neighborhood. There's half a mile of forest between my eastern fence and the first cluster of houses. But Karen said it with such authority that for a moment I wondered if I'd missed a meeting where the world tilted into her version of reality. She was confrontational in that special way some people master, never shouting, just insisting. Every sentence felt like an order disguised as community concern. She carried herself like she owned the air we were breathing, and the ground we were standing on was merely borrowing space from her. When I didn't immediately respond, she added, "Young people don't always understand the responsibility that comes with land. It shouldn't just sit there, unused. The community could benefit from it." That was the first time she hinted at a belief she would later cling to, that my land wasn't truly mine. I told her calmly the trees were staying. She stared at me as if I'd violated a federal regulation. "Well," she finally said, "others won't appreciate your lack of cooperation." And with that cryptic line, she walked away, leaving the scent of cheap perfume swirling in the air and the faint echo of her entitlement hanging behind her. It didn't take long for her complaints to multiply. She insisted that wildlife crossing my driveway was a hazard caused by improper land management. She knocked on my door to tell me my mailbox was the wrong aesthetic for the area. She left printouts of articles about community gardens with handwritten notes like, "Imagine how lovely this could be on your unused acres." Every interaction made it clearer. Karen believed land should serve her vision, not belong to the person who inherited it. "Neighbors warned me, she means well," one said. "She's intense," another admitted. But intensity wasn't the problem. Entitlement was. Karen genuinely believed she held authority over spaces she didn't own, didn't manage, and didn't contribute to. The HOA never appointed her, but that didn't stop her from speaking as if she represented a board of 12 people instead of the echo chamber inside her own head. The first real conflict, though still indirect, was about the trees again. She called the county to report invasive shrub growth endangering neighborhood visibility. A county worker showed up embarrassed, knew immediately it was her, and apologized while inspecting nothing. He even muttered, "She files 2 complaints a week, don't take it personally." But Karen did take things personally, especially the idea of ownership. She had told someone loudly enough for me to hear through the open window that I was far too young to own that much land responsibly. She said it like it was an objective fact, like youth disqualified me from stewardship, discipline, or legacy. Then came the moment I realized she was not just nosy or bothersome, but dangerous in the way people become when they believe fantasy is law. We crossed paths at the farmer's market, and she looked directly at me, smiling with the satisfaction of someone holding a secret. "That bridge shouldn't even be yours," she said, voice soft but sharp. "Some things belong to the community, whether papers say otherwise." Foreshadowing rarely feels like foreshadowing when you're living it, but that sentence, "that bridge shouldn't even be yours," was the first crack in the ground before the landslide. I didn't know it then, but Karen had already decided what was hers, what was mine, and what she intended to take. The real trouble started with the recycling bin. Karen claimed it was an accident, but accidents don't line up perfectly in the center of someone's driveway like chess pieces waiting for a move. I came home one afternoon to find 3 bright blue bins blocking my truck's path, each labeled with a house number that wasn't mine. When I dragged them back to where they belonged, Karen appeared at the edge of the road, pretending to be surprised. "They must have rolled," she said, even though the gravel slope made that physically impossible. Her smile was thin and proud, the kind people wear when they think they've established dominance. I didn't engage. I simply nodded and went inside, leaving her standing there with a look that suggested she expected a confrontation and was disappointed she didn't get one. The next escalation came through email. Not mine because Karen didn't have it, but through the local HOA, which I wasn't and had never been part of. The first message popped up one morning with a bold subject line: mandatory attendance, community land use discussion. Inside, the email listed issues requiring input from land-adjacent owners, which apparently included me. I ignored it, assuming someone confused my address with a subdivision property. But then a second email arrived, this one more aggressive: failure to attend meetings may result in fines. That line made me pause. Fines from whom? For what? My land wasn't under their jurisdiction. I replied with a single sentence: I am not a member of your HOA. 10 minutes later, a follow-up appeared. All residents have community responsibilities. That phrasing smelled like Karen, flowery in its false authority, and vague enough to sound official if you didn't know better. I did know better. Years of engineering projects had taught me to read maps more carefully than most people read marriage licenses. The real blow, though, didn't come through email. It came through whispers. I started hearing rumors, small at first, like the recycling bins, that I was blocking emergency access with my bridge. Someone claimed firefighters couldn't reach the river. Another insisted ambulances were being rerouted because my property interfered with public right-of-way. Each version was more absurd than the last, but absurdity doesn't stop rumors. If anything, it feeds them. A neighbor approached me apologetically, outside the hardware store. "Look, I don't believe it," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "But Karen's telling people you put up barriers to keep emergency crews off the land." I asked him why emergency crews would ever need to cross a private bridge in the first place. She says it's a safety issue. Says you're ignoring community welfare. That was the moment I realized Karen had crossed a line, not physically but psychologically. She had moved from annoyance to narrative building. People like her don't just complain, they craft stories where they are the hero and everyone else is irresponsible, dangerous, or incompetent. Once they believe that story, they push it until reality bends or breaks. So I opened the county map again, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted the clarity that only hard lines and legal ink can give. The HOA boundary was shaped like a lopsided horseshoe around the subdivision. My land sat well outside those lines. My driveway, my bridge, my river access, none of it belonged to them. The county had registered the bridge as private access only, visible on the official GIS system in thick blue shading. Knowledge nugget 10-1. HOAs have zero authority outside their mapped jurisdiction. No matter how loudly they write emails or how confidently someone like Karen pushes her clipboard around, they cannot issue fines, demand attendance, or enforce rules on land that is not legally part of their community. Their power ends exactly where their boundary lines end. And my bridge, it wasn't just outside their domain, it was explicitly protected from any HOA claim, noted in county documents with the phrase, "private crossing, no public right-of-way." None of that stopped Karen. If anything, learning she had no authority only seemed to fuel her. People like her don't shrink when exposed. They escalate, they double down. They convince themselves that rules don't apply if they disagree with them. The recycling bins, the emails, the rumors, they were only the opening act. Karen hadn't yet stepped onto the real stage, but she would. And soon, the bridge she claimed shouldn't even be mine would become the exact place where every lie she told collapsed under its own weight. The first black trash bag showed up on a Thursday morning, sitting right in the center of my bridge like a bloated landmark. I noticed it from 50 yards away, an ugly shape interrupting the clean line of the planks. At first I didn't think much of it. Construction crews had been rerouted through nearby streets for weeks. Maybe a contractor's truck hit a bump and something fell out unnoticed. I had seen weirder things land on rural property: old tires, scrap wood, even a broken satellite dish once. So I parked my truck, walked toward the bridge, and prepared myself for whatever mess I'd have to haul away. The bag sagged with a heavy slosh, something liquid inside shifting when I nudged it with my boot. A sour chemical smell leaked from a small tear on the side, and I instinctively stepped back. Not household garbage, not food waste. Something heavier, sharper, the kind of thing people throw away when they don't want to pay disposal fees. Still, I convinced myself it was an accident, a mistake. Someone would come back for it. Then I felt it, the prickle in the back of my neck that told me I wasn't alone. Across the river, half hidden behind a hedge, stood Karen, arms crossed, hip tilted, eyes on me with the smug satisfaction of someone watching expected behavior unfold. She didn't wave, didn't pretend to be passing by, just stood there watching me inspect a bag like she had placed it for exactly this moment. I lifted the torn edge slightly to see inside: broken chunks of drywall, rusted nails, and what looked like old flooring tiles. Definitely construction waste. I tied the tear shut and set the bag aside, planning to call a disposal service after lunch. When I turned back toward my truck, Karen stepped out from behind the hedge and walked closer, stopping right at the tree line like she owned the scenery. "Everything all right?" she asked, voice sweetened with something artificial. "Saw you inspecting that. Looks like someone's been careless." I kept my tone steady, probably a contractor mistake. "I'll take care of it." Karen's smile tightened, like she'd been waiting for that exact response. Some people don't know how to maintain shared areas." "Shared?" I repeated, already knowing her angle. She shrugged, feigning innocence so thin it was almost translucent. "Well, it's a bridge. Bridges connect people. Feels communal." That was when the puzzle pieces clicked, quietly, reluctantly, but undeniably. Karen wasn't surprised to see the trash. She was pleased, expectant, testing boundaries the same way she'd tested them with the trees and the rumors and the HOA emails. This wasn't an accident, it was a pilot run. I didn't argue. Years in the Army taught me most battles aren't won by the first shot, but by choosing when to return fire. So I simply nodded, grabbed the bag, and carried it to the truck bed, ignoring the faint sting on my hands from the leaking chemicals. When I turned around again, Karen was still watching, chin lifted slightly, as if evaluating how much I'd tolerate. "Good thing you're responsible," she added. "Some folks would leave a mess like that for others to deal with." She walked away before I could respond, not because she expected a reply, but because she didn't need one. The message was already delivered. She had crossed onto my bridge, into my space, and she wanted me to know she felt entitled to it. I hauled the bag off later that afternoon, but the smell lingered in the wood longer than I liked. A faint chemical tang mixed with dust clinging to the underside of the railing. The bridge felt violated. Not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, subtle way that tells you a small problem is about to become a much bigger one. I told myself it would stop. I knew even then that it wouldn't. But sometimes denial isn't ignorance, it's hope trying to buy a little more time before the real conflict begins. The second incident wasn't a bag, it was a chair, an entire wooden dining chair, lying on its side in the middle of the bridge like someone had hurled it there with both hands. One leg was snapped clean off, splinters scattered across the planks like sharp confetti. I found it early in the morning, dew still clinging to the broken wood, meaning it had been tossed sometime before dawn. This wasn't an accident. No contractor drops a single chair in the dead of night onto private property. Someone had climbed the embankment, crossed the bridge, and dumped it deliberately. I took photos from multiple angles, zooming in on the splinter pattern, the scrape marks on the railing, the faint shoe print left in the damp wood. My pulse stayed steady, the same controlled rhythm I'd learned to maintain under pressure in the Army. Document first, react later. It was a rule worth keeping. 2 days later, 3 more chairs appeared, this time stacked, as if Karen or whoever she had convinced to assist wanted to make a point. Then came the bags, not the soft, sagging ones from before. These were heavy, rigid, filled with broken concrete chunks that thudded when I moved them, debris that should have been taken to a construction landfill. The kind of waste people dump illegally because disposal fees are too high. I cut one open with a box cutter and felt my jaw tighten when powdered dust drifted into the river breeze. Concrete leaches lime, lime kills fish. That's when the wildlife casualties started. A young raccoon died near the waterline after chewing through a plastic bag that had blown off the bridge. A heron tangled its leg in shredded painter's tarp, something that matched the materials inside one of the bags. I freed it, but the injury left the bird limping as it flew away. Each incident felt like a punch delivered to the land my grandfather had protected, the land I had promised to continue protecting long after he and my father were gone. I kept documenting everything: photos, dates, notes, angles, footprint, damage reports. My phone filled with images of destruction layered over the memories I still carried from childhood. The more the dumping escalated, the quieter I became, not out of fear but calculation. People like Karen expect loud reactions so they can twist the narrative. Staying calm was my way of denying her fuel. One morning I found the bridge railing cracked, split from the force of something heavy being shoved against it. The wood bowed outward, dangling over the river like a broken rib. Another time, a wheelbarrow full of shattered tile appeared, dumped so violently that pieces scattered across 20 feet of planking. How someone managed to haul that much weight onto the bridge without weight seen was beyond me. But entitlement often gives people a strange kind of strength. The pattern was obvious. Karen didn't just want to use my bridge. She wanted to degrade it, break it down physically so her imagined claim over it seemed more justified. I didn't confront her, not yet. She watched me from the tree line during several of these discoveries, always at a distance, always with that half smile that suggested satisfaction, ownership, and anticipation. She wanted me to explode, to yell, to make a scene she could weaponize, but I kept my voice steady whenever she approached. I let silence do the work she expected rage to handle. Knowledge nugget Den 2. Illegal dumping isn't just an inconvenience, it's a criminal offense. Under state and county law, fines for illegal dumping can exceed $25,000 depending on environmental damage. Construction debris, chemical materials, and anything that contaminates protected waterways are treated as separate violations. That means each bag, each chair, each shard of tile wasn't just rude or reckless. It was a legal liability, and not for me, for the person responsible. Every single item counted as its own offense. I knew this. Karen didn't. Or worse, she thought the rules didn't apply to her. People like her often imagine they're shielded by confidence alone, but confidence doesn't erase county statutes. It doesn't excuse environmental damage, and it certainly doesn't override documented evidence. Still, watching the land suffer wasn't easy. My grandfather's bridge had weathered storms, floods, and the slow decay of time, but it hadn't prepared for intentional sabotage by a neighbor who believed it was unsightly, underutilized, or community accessible. The damage wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was deliberate. Targeted. A message wrapped in debris. The low point came when I found a mound of broken fiberglass insulation dumped directly beside the railing. Pink dust drifted along the wind, catching in my sleeves, stinging my skin. Fiberglass is dangerous. It scars the lungs. Seeing it on my bridge felt like a violation deeper than the others. Crossing from disrespect into genuine malice, I stood there for several minutes, breathing slowly, letting the anger rise and settle like silt in the river below. The bridge creaked under my boots, a familiar sound carrying an unfamiliar ache. I knew the escalation wouldn't stop on its own. Karen wasn't finished. She was testing how far she could push before something pushed back. And I was done giving her space. It didn't take long for Karen to realize that dumping trash onto my bridge wasn't getting the reaction she wanted, so she shifted tactics. If she couldn't break me directly, she'd try to isolate me, turn the community against me first, then circle back once I was worn thin. And she started with the river. I learned from a neighbor, an older man who walked his dog past my fence line, that Karen had been telling people I was destroying the river on purpose. According to her, my mismanagement was causing pollution spikes, algae blooms, and possible contamination downstream. None of it was true. But the thing about lies is that they don't need facts. They just need to sound urgent. She painted herself as the watchful guardian, and me as the careless landowner too young and irresponsible to understand environmental stewardship. It got worse. The HOA, where Karen held no official position but plenty of influence, started sending me violation letters. They arrived in crisp envelopes with bold headers declaring fines for failure to maintain shared access, waterway obstruction, and hazardous waste retention. The language was designed to intimidate, full of legal-sounding terms that had no place on documents issued by a suburban HOA, 3/4 of a mile away from my property. They demanded payment within 10 days. They threatened additional penalties for non-compliance. Each letter went straight into a folder I kept on my desk, labeled Karen in black marker. Not because I took them seriously, but because I knew documentation mattered more than emotion. Then came the note, no envelope, no signature, just a piece of lined yellow paper taped to my mailbox with sloppy handwriting that read, "Fix the river problem, or the community will take action." The phrasing made my stomach tighten, not from fear, but from the sense that this was no longer just Karen acting alone. She was recruiting, they're spreading a narrative, gathering an audience. Rumors travel fast in small towns, especially when someone pours gasoline on them and hands out matches. At the farmer's market, 2 women stopped talking when I walked by. At the hardware store, the clerk avoided eye contact. Even people I'd known for years seemed hesitant, unsure whether to greet me or keep distance until the smoke cleared. That's the cruel thing about false accusations. They stain the air long before the truth arrives to clean it. After the 3rd HOA letter, I decided to attend one of their meetings, not because I was obligated to, but because silence was starting to feel like surrender. The community center buzzed with quiet tension when I walked in. Karen sat near the front, shoulders back, chin raised, wearing an expression that said she believed I had finally come to be disciplined. I took a seat near the aisle. The board members shuffled papers, avoiding my eyes like they'd been coached. When the meeting opened for comments, I stood, introduced myself, and calmly explained that my property was not part of their jurisdiction. I referenced county maps, legal boundaries, and the private access designation of my bridge. The room shifted. People glanced between me and the board, waiting for acknowledgement, for some sense of fairness. But the board chair, a man who had always been polite in passing, cleared his throat and said, "We believe community matters extend beyond technical boundary lines. Everyone has a responsibility to uphold neighborhood values." In other words, they didn't care about the law, they cared about Karen's narrative. I felt something in my chest sink, not anger, not fear, but a heavy, suffocating disappointment. It was the first moment I truly wondered if I could fight this alone. The dumping was one thing, the lies were another. But standing in a room full of people who chose convenience over truth, that was something else entirely, and it chipped at me in a way the broken furniture and chemical bags never had. I left the meeting without raising my voice, without arguing, without giving Karen the spectacle she wanted. But as the door closed behind me, I felt the weight of isolation pressing down. For the first time since this began, doubt crept in. Maybe the bridge wasn't the only thing being worn down, maybe I was too. And that was exactly what Karen hoped for. Standing on the bridge one evening, staring at the warped railing and the scattering of broken tiles still wedged between the planks, I felt something shift inside me, not a crack, not a snap, but a tightening. A line being drawn. Karen wasn't going to stop, and the HOA wasn't interested in truth. If anything was going to change, the burden would fall on me. Not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with strategy. So I made a decision. The next morning, I drove into town and bought professional-grade surveillance cameras, the kind contractors use on high-theft job sites, motion-activated, infrared, weatherproof, with time-stamped metadata stamped directly onto the footage. I installed them myself, one at each corner of the bridge, and another hidden in the nearby cedar tree. Climbing the branches felt familiar, almost nostalgic. I used to perch there as a kid, pretending I was scouting enemy positions. Funny how childhood games turn into adult preparation. By sunset, the system was live. Every angle covered, every movement captured. If Karen wanted a battleground, she'd chosen the wrong engineer to provoke. But cameras were only the first step. The following day, I quietly filed a report with the county environmental office. Not a complaint, not an accusation, but a request for guidance regarding suspected illegal dumping near a protected watershed. I included descriptions of materials I'd found: concrete chunks, insulation fibers, damaged furniture coated in chemical varnish. The kind of details that raise eyebrows among people trained to recognize environmental threats. I didn't mention Karen by name. Not time would reveal the truth without my help. Then I made the call I'd been putting off. The call to my father's old lawyer, Samuel Brewer. He picked up on the second ring, voice steady and aged like oak. "Haven't heard your name in a long time," he said. "Your dad keeping you out of trouble, or pulling you into it?" "Bit of both," I answered. I explained everything. The trash, the rumors, the HOA letters, the damaged bridge. Samuel didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he exhaled slowly, the way my father used to when sorting through a problem that wasn't as complicated as people made it. "You've done the right thing so far," he said. "Stay quiet, document everything. The kind of people who behave like this eventually hand you the rope you need." There was no judgment in his tone, just certainty. That certainty steadied me. Knowledge nugget den 3. In cases involving property damage or illegal dumping, chain of custody is everything. Evidence is only as strong as its documented journey from the moment it's collected to the moment it's presented. That means photos must be time-stamped. Videos must show continuous, unaltered footage. Items must be handled minimally or stored properly. Reports must be filed before accusations are made. I had already been following those principles instinctively, but hearing Samuel reinforce them solidified my approach. If Karen escalated, and she would, every step she took would be preserved. Traceable, undeniable. After hanging up, I walked back to the bridge. The evening light cut through the trees, painting long shadows across the planks. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood I wasn't fighting her alone. The law was a quiet ally. Slow, patient, waiting for facts to line up like dominoes. Karen wanted drama. She wanted chaos. But I knew something she didn't. Chaos is loud. Evidence is louder. The cameras had been up for 3 days when they finally caught what I'd been waiting for. What, deep down, I knew would eventually happen. It started just after midnight, the river half hidden beneath a low fog, the bridge glowing faintly beneath the motion-triggered LEDs I'd installed. The moment the sensors detected movement, all 4 cameras clicked awake, silently recording from every angle. Karen entered the frame like a shadow with purpose. She wasn't sneaking, she wasn't cautious, she walked onto my bridge with the confidence of someone convinced the world bowed wherever she stepped. A reflective HOA badge hung from her jacket pocket, swinging with each stride, as if she wanted the cameras, had she known about them, to capture her title. In her mind, that badge wasn't meaningless plastic. It was authority, permission, power. Behind her, dragged on a tarp, was the first load, 2 black bags swollen with debris. She heaved them onto the planks, pausing only to adjust her gloves. The cameras picked up everything, the strain in her posture, the thud of concrete inside the bags, the dust cloud rising when one landed too hard. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, then glanced both ways down the river, not knowing she was being watched from a viewpoint more honest than the human eye. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She reached into her backpack and pulled out bolt cutters, long-handled, red-gripped, unmistakable. The camera zoomed in automatically, time-stamping the motion. She approached the small metal gate I'd installed at the end of the bridge. A lightweight barrier meant more as a symbol of boundary than a physical obstacle. Karen gripped the cutters around the lock, braced her foot, and snapped the metal in half with one decisive crunch. The sound carried across the water. She actually smiled at the broken lock, like she'd defeated some great injustice. Then she shoved the gate open with her shoulder and dragged 2 more bags across, dumping them over the side with a grunt. One burst open when it hit the rocks below, spilling chunks of tile and pieces of drywall into the riverbed. The cameras recorded each piece tumbling, captured in crystal clarity. She wasn't done. A second trip followed 20 minutes later, then a third, each load heavier than the last. On one run she even brought broken cabinets, tossing them off the bridge with the irritation of someone cleaning out a garage and expecting gratitude for it. Through it all, her badge reflected in the light, her symbol of false power glinting like a confession. By dawn, she had made 7 trips. When the sun rose and the cameras switched from night mode to full color, Karen stood on the bridge for a moment, panting, satisfied, hands on her hips. Then she said something out loud, barely audible on the recording, but clear enough when enhanced later. "This will teach him. Not teach the community, not fix a problem. Teach me." When she left, the bridge was scarred, fresh gouges in the railing, muddy streaks across the planks, and fragments of plaster clinging to the joints. But I didn't feel anger when I watched the footage. I felt clarity, calm, the quiet certainty of someone finally holding the truth in his hands. I spent the next several hours assembling everything into an airtight evidence file, video clips, time-stamped photographs, notes on damage, a map overlay showing the camera geolocation matching county coordinates. Every piece was labeled and preserved according to chain of custody standards Samuel had drilled into me. By the time I finished, the file wasn't just strong, it was devastating. Karen had built her narrative on rumors and arrogance. I had built mine on facts, and facts were about to hit much harder than anything she had thrown off that bridge. The county environmental office didn't waste time. Once they reviewed the footage and the written report I'd submitted, they escalated it to the Environmental Protection Unit, a division that doesn't get involved unless there's clear evidence of illegal dumping, watershed contamination, or repeated violation. Karen didn't know it yet, but she hadn't just broken a neighbor's patience. She'd broken state law. 2 days later, an environmental officer named Ramirez and a county compliance investigator drove straight to her house. I wasn't there, but Ramirez later walked me through everything in detail, and the body cam footage confirmed his account. It was surreal watching the events unfold from a perspective that wasn't mine. Karen opened the door with her usual authority, arms crossed, face set in the expression she used for anyone she believed ranked below her imaginary position. "Can I help you?" she said, already assuming she controlled the conversation. "Ma'am, we're here regarding an ongoing investigation involving illegal dumping on private property," Ramirez explained calmly. Karen's eyebrows shot up. "Illegal dumping? Here? I've been trying to get the county to address his mess for weeks." She jabbed a thumb down the street as if my house was a blight infecting her view. Ramirez kept his voice even. "We have reason to believe you may have information about the materials found on the property." Karen stiffened. "Well, I don't. And I won't tolerate false accusations. I'm part of the environmental watch for this community." There it was, the self-appointed title she wielded like a license to interfere. She stood taller when she said it, chest raised, chin angled upward like she expected the officers to salute her. Ramirez didn't blink. "Ma'am, can we speak inside? It's better for privacy." Karen hesitated, then stepped back. "Fine, but I want it on record that I'm cooperating fully." The second they entered the living room, Ramirez opened a folder and placed several printed still frames on her coffee table. High resolution, times angle after angle showing her dragging bags, tossing debris, wielding bolt cutters and forcibly breaking the bridge gate. Karen froze. Not a physical freeze, more like a system failure. Her eyes flicked over each image, searching for something to disprove, a loophole, an excuse. Her mouth opened slightly, closed, then opened again as if her thoughts couldn't agree on which lie to begin with. Finally, she landed on denial. "This isn't me," she said sharply. "Ramirez didn't move the photos. Ma'am, the footage is clear. Your face, your clothing, your HOA badge. That badge means I am responsible for community property," she snapped. "The bridge isn't community property." "It should be," she fired back, voice rising. The investigator stepped in. "Regardless of what you believe, it is legally—" "No," Karen interrupted, slamming her hand on the table so hard the frames shifted. Her voice went shrill, cracking around the edges. "That bridge belongs to the community. He's been stealing access for years." Body cam footage caught the exact moment her meltdown crested. She was breathing hard, face blotched red, eyes wild with indignation and certainty. She wasn't arguing law, she was arguing fantasy. Ramirez waited for her to finish, then delivered the line that would eventually become the quote repeated throughout the courtroom, the community, and according to neighbors, the local Facebook page. "No," he said firmly, each word placed with precision. "It belongs to the man you've been harassing." Karen's mouth fell open, stunned silent, not because she lacked something to say, but because, for the first time, someone with actual authority told her she was wrong. Not questioned, not debated, told. She tried one last weak attempt. "This is a misunderstanding. I was cleaning, helping, making sure trash didn't pile up." Ramirez tapped a photo showing her tossing concrete into the river. "Is that what you call helping?" Her composure shattered. She stammered, deflected, blamed poor lighting, claimed the footage was misinterpreted, even insisted she was set up. None of it held. The officers had already seen the full videos, the timestamps, the angles, the metadata. It all contradicted her. When they finally left her house, she was pacing in frantic circles, muttering about ungrateful neighbors and stolen land. Her voice carried into the yard, echoing off the siding like a warning of the storm still brewing inside her, but the narrative had shifted. Her authority had cracked, and for the first time, Karen realized she wasn't the hunter in this story. She was the one cornered. The small county courtroom was packed shoulder to shoulder, the kind of crowd you only see at holiday parades or scandal hearings. Word travels fast in rural towns, and Karen's meltdown had spread through the community like spilled paint, messy, impossible to ignore, and dripping into every conversation. People filled the benches, whispering behind cupped hands, eyes flicking between me, Karen, and the judge's bench, as if waiting for a live performance. When Judge Halverson entered, the room settled into a hush. He was a broad-shouldered man with stern eyebrows, and the patient expression of someone who had heard every excuse known to mankind. He scanned the courtroom, then paused when he reached me. "You're the engineer who worked on the river reinforcement project overseas, aren't you?" "Yes, Your Honor," I answered. He nodded. "I've read your file. Thorough work." The acknowledgement wasn't flattery, it was a subtle signal to the room, credibility established. Karen shifted beside her attorney, trying to sit taller, but her composure already looked brittle. Samuel, my father's old lawyer, stepped forward with the quiet precision of a man sharpening a blade. He handed a binder to the judge. "Your Honor, this is the compiled evidence. Time-stamped footage, environmental samples, repair invoices, and a structural damage report prepared by my client." The judge opened the binder. The first page displayed Karen dragging a tarp full of debris across the bridge. The next showed her snapping the lock, then multiple angles of her tossing concrete into the river. Gasps rippled through the room. Samuel continued, "The cleanup alone totals 87 structural repairs to the bridge. Add another 5. Environmental mitigation, depending on river impact, may increase the total further." Karen's attorney shot up. "These numbers are exaggerated. My client was trying to assist the community." Samuel didn't even turn to look at him. He simply pulled out printed HOA emails, ones Karen had influenced but carelessly left a digital trail on. "Here are messages sent to Miss Harper demanding attendance at HOA meetings, threatening fines and accusing him of obstructing emergency access. Not only false but outside HOA jurisdiction entirely." The judge flipped through them, his eyebrows rising. "Is this your signature, ma'am?" he asked Karen. She hesitated. I helped draft them, but only because no one else would take responsibility for his land." "And you believe that entitled you to access, alter, and damage private property?" "I believe the bridge should be shared," she snapped. "He hoards land. It's harmful to the community. Someone had to take action." The courtroom inhaled sharply, Even the HOA board members, seated in the second row, shifted away from her as if physical distance could erase their embarrassment. Their president stood, "Your Honor, the HOA had no knowledge of her actions, and we fully distance ourselves from any involvement." Karen twisted in her seat. "You're all cowards," she hissed. "I did what you refused to do." The judge closed the binder with a decisive thud that echoed through the room. "Ma'am," he said, voice deep and level, "I have reviewed the evidence, the footage, the financial assessments, and the emails. It is abundantly clear that you not only acted without authority, you acted with deliberate disregard for the law, the environment, and the property rights of another citizen." Karen tried to speak, but he raised a hand. "And let me make one thing perfectly clear," he continued, leaning slightly forward. "This bridge held up better than your story has." Laughter broke from the back rows before the judge silenced the room with a glance. Karen slumped, shoulders collapsing inward, the first real sign she understood the cliff her arrogance had led her over. Her attorney tried whispering to her, but she stared ahead, eyes wide and unfocused, as though the world had abruptly stopped obeying her. The hammer hadn't fallen yet, but everyone knew it was coming. Judge Halverson took his time before delivering the ruling, letting the weight of the evidence settle over the courtroom like dust after a demolition. Karen sat rigid, her jaw tight, fingers twisting the hem of her blouse in frantic, uneven pulls. Her attorney had stopped whispering advice. Even he knew there was no version of this story where she walked out clean. When the judge finally spoke, the room went silent enough to hear the old ceiling fan ticking above us. "Given the overwhelming evidence," he began, "and the severity of the environmental and structural damage caused, the court rules as follows." Karen inhaled sharply, the kind of breath people take before an impact. "First," the judge said, lifting a sheet of paper, "you are ordered to pay $148,000 in damages to cover the repairs to the bridge and surrounding property." A soft gasp rippled across the benches. Karen's face went pale. 100. "What?" she whispered, voice breaking around the edges. The judge continued without pause. "Second, you will be financially responsible for all environmental restoration fees, including riverbed cleanup, water quality assessments, and mitigation procedures deemed necessary by the Environmental Protection Unit." Karen shook her head rapidly. "That's not, Your Honor, I was protecting the river." "No," he said, firm. "You were poisoning it." Her knees trembled beneath the table. "Third," he added, "you will issue a formal written and public apology acknowledging your actions and their consequences. This apology will be submitted to the county office and shared with the affected parties." Karen looked as though she'd been slapped. Pride had been her shield. Now it was being stripped away in front of everyone. The judge then turned his attention toward the HOA representatives, who sat stiffly, hands clasped, hoping to disappear. "As for the HOA," he said, "your organization is fined for unlawful harassment and for issuing authorized violation notices outside your jurisdiction. You will participate in a mandatory compliance audit to review overreach and procedural failures." The board president swallowed hard and nodded, face flushed with humiliation. Karen's collapse wasn't dramatic at first. Her breathing hitched, her shoulders sagged, her eyes blinked rapidly as if trying to erase the sight of the courtroom closing in around her. Then the verdict finished landing. No, this isn't," she stammered. "I was helping, I was the only one helping." Her voice cracked so violently the room flinched with her. She grabbed the table for balance, sobbing through clenched teeth. "You don't understand, he shouldn't even have, he shouldn't." Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, but she jerked away, tears streaming, mascara streaking down her cheeks like black rivers. The collapse became physical, her body folding in on itself, elbows on the table, forehead resting against her clenched fists. The judge watched with the calm of someone who had seen similar unravelings before. "This court is adjourned." The gavel fell, people stood, papers shuffled. The courtroom buzzed with whispered shock. But Karen stayed seated, shaking, the realization settling into her bones. She hadn't just lost, she had been exposed. The cleanup started the following week, when county crews rolled in at sunrise with trucks, safety gear, and the kind of quiet determination people bring when they know they're repairing something that never should have been damaged in the first place. I stood at the edge of the bridge as they unloaded equipment, the early light catching on reflective vests and the rippling surface of the river below. For the first time in months, the place felt like it was breathing again. They began by hauling out the trash Karen had dumped. Bags split open from impact, shards of tile embedded between planks, rusted nails scattered like caltrops. Workers moved with practiced efficiency, collecting debris in industrial containers, labeling each type of waste for proper disposal. Watching the riverbank clear felt like watching a wound being cleaned, painful at first, then strangely relieving. One of the crew members shook his head and said, "Whoever did this didn't care about the land at all. I didn't respond." The truth was already loud enough. When they shifted to repairing the bridge, I stayed close, not to supervise the workers. They knew exactly what they were doing, but to honor the structure itself. My grandfather had built it with stubborn hands and quiet pride. Seeing it damaged had felt personal, like a bruise on something sacred. The crews replaced cracked planks, reinforced the railing, and inspected the steel trusses I'd installed years before. One of the engineers nodded approvingly. "Solid work," he said. "This bridge was built to last." Hearing that felt like a small blessing. What surprised me most wasn't the county's involvement, it was the community's response. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in weeks showed up on their own time. Some brought gloves, others brought coffee. A few apologized for believing rumors. They swept, gathered loose debris, cleared brush, and restored the path leading down to the water. None of them had asked for guidance, they simply stepped in, as if fixing the bridge meant repairing something in themselves too. By the time the last truck pulled away, the land looked whole again. And for the first time since Karen started her campaign, so did I. Karen's downfall didn't unfold in a dramatic burst. It unraveled in quiet, humiliating stages, each one stripping away the authority she had imagined for herself. The HOA board moved first. After the court ruling, they held an emergency meeting, voting unanimously to remove her from every committee, group chat, and volunteer list she had once dominated. The announcement was brief. Effective immediately, Karen W. is no longer affiliated with HOA operations. For someone who lived off manufactured authority, it was a public beheading. The social fallout hit even harder. Neighbors who once tolerated her now crossed the street to avoid her. Parents pulled their kids away when she approached. Conversations died the moment she appeared. The woman who once monitored everyone else's business found herself watched instead, quietly, cautiously, with a mixture of pity and relief. Within a month, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. No explanation, no farewell, no final attempt to reclaim dignity. Just a desperate attempt to escape the consequences she had created. The house sat untouched for weeks, blinds drawn, driveway empty. Rumor had it she spent her days indoors, curtains closed, afraid to face the community she'd tried to control. For the first time, Karen had nothing left to enforce. A few evenings after the last crew had gone, I walked the bridge alone at sunset. The sky was washed in gold and burnt orange, the river below reflecting every shifting color like it wanted to hold the moment still. The new planks creaked softly under my boots, different from the old sound, but strong, steady, honest. I paused halfway across and rested my hand on the rebuilt railing. The wood was smooth, warm from the fading light, and carried none of the scars Karen had carved into it. For the first time in a long while I breathed, without tension tightening my chest. No accusations, no surveillance, no quiet war waiting on the other side of the fence. Just the river, the wind, and a bridge that had survived far more than it should have had to. I thought about the months of chaos, the lies, the weight of fighting something built on entitlement and noise. And I thought about how calm strength, quiet, patient, deliberate, had outlasted all of it. My grandfather used to say you can learn a lot about people by what they try to break. Standing there, I understood exactly what he meant. A bridge carries weight, but it also teaches who can't handle any. If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, a neighbor who overstepped, or someone who tried to take what wasn't theirs, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below, not just to vent but because your experience might help someone else going through the same silent battle. These stories matter. They remind people they're not alone, and that calm persistence can outlast even the loudest chaos. If you want more justice-driven stories like this, real confrontations, real consequences, and real power flip moments, make sure to subscribe. It helps the channel more than you know, and it lets me keep telling the kinds of stories that deserve to be heard. Before you click away, take one last look at this place in your mind. The river running clean again beneath the bridge. The water moving the way it always should have, untouched by anyone's arrogance. The land is quiet now, restored, at peace. And every time the sunlight hits the surface just right, it feels like a reminder that truth has a way of rising back to the top, no matter how much debris someone tries to bury it under. Thanks for watching. Now tell me, what's your HOA story?